Good evening, viewers, and welcome to the Evening Review Show. I'm Matthias Aufiku, news editor of the Namibian Sun newspaper. Well, tonight we converse on a matter that's very close to the hearts of many Namibians. Of course, a somber matter for that matter, but nonetheless, history teaches us that without it, we cannot move forward. Well, we speak about the Genocide Remembrance Day. Of course, it's a matter that has moved through Parliament. It was tabled in 2006. And as for now, we wait for the gazetting thereof so that they can be officially recognized by government. And for that, in the studio, we have Mr. Mbakumua Hengari. He's the co-chairman of the Technical Committee of the Chiefs Assembly, just to give us more information of this day and how far the process is thus far. Mr. Hengari, welcome and good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Aufiku, and good evening to viewers. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
No, thank you for coming through. Well, Mr. Hengari, just briefly, there's been events over the weekend regarding 28 May. That's the day that's earmarked as the one that should be gazetted to remember this very tragic happening. Could you just take us briefly through the events of the weekend?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think what we did over the last weekend leading up to the main event on Sunday was to mark the first Genocide Remembrance Day in Namibia. 2016, there was a motion pushed through Parliament. Countrywide consultation through Parliamentary Committee were conducted, and the date of 28 May emerged as the most suitable date given the diversity of the history of the wars of resistance, including the genocides pertaining or coming out of the two extermination orders that were issued, one against the Ovahereros and the second one against the Nama communities of Namibia then. So the date of 28 May became the most logical day on which to have a remembrance around the question of genocide. Why the 28th of May? We had a very good presentation by former MP and President Oswanu, former President Oswanu, who moved this motion through Parliament, and he gave us the background that the day was chosen because it was the date in 1908, after 4 years of this genocidal war and concentration in slave camps or cheap labor camps. That is the day that on which these camps were closed or were ordered officially to be closed. It kind of marked our liberation or the liberation of our people. And now just the same way we mark the 21st of March as the day of independence, and we celebrate and rejoice the freedom that we attained, political freedom that we attained. This is the day on which those that were incarcerated, the walking skeletons that they were released. And this is the day on which we want to give their soul the redemption that they deserve. For they indeed stood between colonialism and freedom. And they sacrificed the ultimate price for that. Because it is only after the defeat of the Hereros and Namas then that Namibia was formally colonized by Germany. So this is not a mean feat. Yes.
So, well, all these years have passed since this motion went through Parliament. One would think, is it getting the recognition it deserves? One would have thought this process to have been completed by now.
This is the paradox that one gets, and that is what one doesn't want to be overcritical about against whom or the other, but it is paradoxical that our government has engaged in a process of negotiations ostensibly for the genocide that was committed in Namibia. Now, when we seek reparations contains a number of elements. One of those elements is remembrance or memorialization. The others go to compensation and restitution and whatever. But for us to have, through our government, engaged in a process of negotiating reparations, but we have not done the most basic of things. That does not require Germany's approval. Yeah. That just requires a pen by the executive head to proclaim this day after it went through the National Assembly, and National Assembly passed it in 2020 already, after the process that took place in 2016. This is just mind-boggling. And that is where we as descendants decided maybe we must try and give this an impetus by marking this day as we did last weekend. We hope it was observed and notice was taken of it by the powers that be so that we can get a conclusion on this issue. Yeah. It is long overdue. Yeah.
So, what is the feeling like on the ground currently, especially amongst the descendant communities? What is the feeling like as to not just the negotiations with Germany, but also the Remembrance Day? What is the feeling like? Is it a journey still worth pursuing? Is it a journey which still has some fulfillment left in it?
What we have at our hands is a movement and a struggle and a desire or yearning for redemption. If nothing else, the redemption of those who sacrifice this, who made this supreme sacrifice. It engenders a whole, and we out of that, the collective descendants of the victims, suffer and continue to suffer this transgenerational trauma. We suffer impoverishment because one of the things that we look at currently is, if you look at the land disposition and the picture of land distribution today, it was caused by a stroke of a pen when in 1906 the Germans decreed that all land and property that hitherto belonged to the Bahero, and when I say Bahero, I mean Bahero, Banderu and stuff, got forfeited to the state. It became crown land. And this is the land that then the Germans started to distribute to settlers. That land remains like that. Yeah. The picture of that. When you look at some of our people, they are in Botswana. Recently, I'm hearing now there's a group of our people that are trying to return. I heard there was a meeting today discussing the modalities around their return. But these people are returning to Namibia, but they are not returning to the land that was theirs, the ancestral land. Yeah. There was a commission on ancestral land rights. It issued a report. We have not seen any tangible results of that in terms of the land that the state buys under the resettlement scheme. So all these things in totality makes you to start to feel, are we children of the same house, the Namibian house? Or are some of us orphans who are supposed to knock at a wrong door of a house that belongs to other people? Yeah. It makes us feel bad. It makes us feel, at times, if it was not for the resolves of some of our leaders, or our traditional leaders, and our collective way of thinking, we would have become desperate and lost. But we are guided, I believe, by, as people who are traditionalists and believe in the spirits of our forefathers and mothers, we are continuing to pursue this. But these are the stark realities that if a section of the population of Namibia went through this, with all these empirical and historical evidence before us, simplest of things, why can't they be done?
Yeah.
What is it that has to happen for our state to embrace this cause?
What message does it send to the world?
It is not a very good message. 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago, there was a report issued by the United Nations Human Rights Council's rapporteurs, where essentially they are telling our government and the government of the Federal Republic of Germany that what they are doing jointly about the issue that we are talking about, remembrance of this genocide, atonement or reparation for it, is wrong. It is against the protocols. The Human Rights Council of the United Nations deal with all human rights issues. You can, from rights of women and girls, rights of indigenous, to issues pertaining to human rights issues, wars and crimes and this. And these 7 rapporteurs of the UN looked, amongst others, at the joint declaration issued by, drafted by the 2 governments, and said this is not the way it ought to have been.
Yeah.
The people that suffered this genocide, or the descendants thereof, must be at the table. They must talk for themselves, because it is only they who know the pains. And if you have to come to a point where you issue, if you are Germany, issue an apology, how do you issue an apology if you have not looked that person in the face and said, look, I think what has happened was wrong, and we must move on. So our government, I think we implore our government to re-look at the approach it has adopted vis-a-vis this issue. And the very first thing, I think, is the most lowest of hanging fruits is this day that has already passed through Parliament. The next phase would be a legislation dealing with the whole question of genocide. It is a crime that happened here. We must outlaw it in Namibia. So these are the kind of things that we need to do for us in our state or government to have the moral authority to engage Germany on the question of reparation.
Would you say government currently doesn't have that moral authority?
It lacks. It lacks that moral authority because it has not done the basics. The things which would have underpinned its authority are the basics that we are talking about now. There must be a legislation outlawing this that makes it a crime to deny it or not to acknowledge it. There must be a process of remembering this by memorializing. We must have monuments. We must have a day like the one that we are talking about. Those are the fabrics of what would give Namibia the moral authority to start to speak authoritatively with anybody on this issue. And that essentially is what the UN underlined in its report.
Yeah. Prior to the past weekend's events, as the Chiefs Assembly, what has your team been up to as far as ensuring that the wheel is well oiled to move?
We have had challenges as authorities and traditional communities, as descendants, of uniting and speaking with a singular voice on this issue. I think what we have achieved with the Chiefs Assembly on Genocide is a remarkable first step to bring traditional authorities and communities together, 8 of them, speaking with one voice on this issue, committing themselves to be speaking with one voice on this, as you saw over the last weekend. It is not a conclusive or exhaustive arrangement yet. That is why the statement that Chief Kambadembi, our chairperson, gave on Saturday he indicated clearly that this is just but the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Efforts would continue to try and reach out.
Mm-hmm.
But what we have done so far in slightly less than 2 years that we have been in existence is to forge this message of unity across, is to have that big remarkable event that we had last weekend. Mm-hmm. And many similar other little things that we have done. Mm-hmm. We have engaged the office of the Vice President, mm-hmm. Which is the door on this issue, mm-hmm. to introduce the Chiefs Assembly. We also put to the Vice President our request that maybe now, as we are trying to reorganize ourselves, and I think we want to reiterate that, now that the UN has passed this judgment, Namibia, as our president always says, is a child of international solidarity. Mm-hmm. And His Excellency always says it was midwifed by the United Nations. Mm-hmm. I think the United Nations has come back and looked at her child and says, look, there are certain things that you are starting to overlook here. Mm-hmm. And that is why we are hopeful that Namibia would not turn a blind eye on what the United Nations is saying when she reminds Namibia that here you are stepping a bit off the rail. Mm-hmm. And we are hopeful that our government would listen, would start to engage. In that respect, we have called for a national conference on this whole concept of genocide, so that it must be ingrained into the conscience, the collective conscience of Namibians. Yeah. It is not, at this point, it's no longer a matter for the victims. The victims have their due. That ought to go to them to restore, restitute, or satisfy them. But the nation also has to have a conscience of this, because if we don't have that collective conscience on this issue, we might make mistakes in the future. Yeah. And we don't want to do what the world did not do. Mm-hmm. So that after hours, you had the Ottoman Empire genocide of Armenians, you had the Holocaust, because the world did not take note and try to stem this matter out. Mm-hmm. In some countries like Germany and the US, you have laws or legislations passed, like the one we are calling for in Namibia, that criminalizes you if you deny that there was genocide or Holocaust. Yeah. So we want the same thing here. Namibia must act now so that we have this in our collective conscience as a nation. Mm-hmm. It must get to the level where it make a significant part of our history, in our history books, so that not only the current generation, but future generations would hear about this when you and I are long gone. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell me, of course, we are cognizant of the dynamics that always exist within this type of activities, especially traditional medicine and so on. It's not just a traditional medicine, it's a national cause for that matter. How has the buy-in been since the inception of the Chiefs Assembly? How has the buy-in been from the public, not just from the descendants, but from the public in general? You mentioned that you approached the office of the Vice President. Could you just take us briefly through that?
I think the buy-in, we are happy with the reviews we are getting, because we have, in a way, succeeded at what so far has been difficult to achieve. To get 8 chiefs to be under one chairman, which they rotate amongst themselves. Yeah. We are now in the second of our chiefs. So it tells you how young we are. And on a 6-month basis, we rotate chairpersons, just because we want to have buy-in and ownership by all authorities that have signed. Yeah. And we want to leave it as such and continue to invite others to join in, because that's the only way we can make sure that everyone feels a part and they feel in charge of the organization. Sometimes when we appoint someone to be chairman for an indefinite period or too long a period, it might create a feeling that, no, it now becomes a Mbakumua thing or a Haufiku thing.
Yeah.
So that's what we are getting.
But some would also ask that there has been structures that has been advocating for this day, and also other matters around the genocide topic. What has prompted the birth of the Chiefs Assembly? And what is it doing different that others were not doing?
I think it is doing more of the same, but where the difference lies is it is now a collection of voices. What is different is therefore the commonality in approach and simplifying the message to avoid the contradictions, because the perception that has been out there has been, particularly from Germany, is that, but you guys are so divided, whom do we talk to? So we want to eliminate that one point. And that is why we say the 8 that are together are not an exhaustive way of unifying. The other thing that we also have to realize, Haufiku, is in any social setup like this one, it is not always easy that you can get everyone to unite in one or under one roof. But what has to be important, though, is that the message that we drive should be, and the objective should be the same. And even if we come from this angle and the other one comes from that, and the other one comes from this, as long as we are moving in the same direction. For example, I mean, not many years ago, just about 33 years ago before independence, we had so many political parties. Okay, so most of them, if not all of them, were advocating for independence. But some were wherever they were, others were wherever they were, but the objective was the same. So I will not be fooling myself that there would come a day when all the chiefs would sit in the same room and say, now we are talking this. But we can, what we can and should do is to develop a common message, and to develop, to borrow the words of one of my colleagues who spoke about this, to develop a blueprint that we can then follow when we engage the Germans. Hence the need for this national conference that we have been speaking about, where we as descendants of the victims and everyone can sit around a table and develop a common blueprint around which we prosecute the question of, reparation. Because the damage has already been done. We must be repaired, we must be restituted, we must be compensated. And yes, there must be a process of memorialization that satisfies us. So that blueprint must be developed jointly. We can't have 5 or 10 different blueprints. And because of that, we need to come together somehow. Even if we continue as separate groups, at least on the blueprint we must agree.
Well, Mr. Hengari, we really appreciate your time this evening, and it was good having you on the show.
Thank you. I was just starting to speak. Good. Thanks.
We'll definitely have you back in the studio soon again.
Very good.
Thank you, and all the best with your work.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, to our viewers, that's it from the Evening Review team. Thank you for staying tuned in. Have a pleasant evening.
Oh,